Hi, my name is Sophia, and I'm 42 years old. A year ago, my life split into before and after, as if someone had drawn a knife across glass, leaving a sharp crack through which silence, fear, and pain seeped. Michelle and I were driving home after dinner with friends. I remember him holding the steering wheel with one hand and squeezing my hand with the other, gently stroking my wrist with his finger, as if to say, "I'm here for you." The light at the intersection was red, but a huge truck, as if blinded by something, burst into our lives, appending everything I knew about happiness and security. When I came to, the world around me sounded like it was being pierced by water, sirens, screams, the clatter of boots, my own wheezing. Michelle didn't move, his face was too calm to be alive. At that moment, it felt like my heart had simply stopped beating because there was no point in it. I survived, but my body became my enemy. I spent several months in a wheelchair, and each day felt like an eternity, where time stretched between stabs of pain and despair. My muscles atrophied, my skin ached from the touch, and my soul ached with emptiness. Later, as I slowly began to rise to my feet, holding on to the metal railing, my physical therapist said, "You are a strong woman, Sophia." I smiled then. But I knew my strength wasn't in my body, my strength lay in my ability to live when I didn't want to. Now I can walk again, albeit with a cane. It has become my constant companion, cold but reliable. After the accident, I felt a deep sense of loneliness. Michelle and I had been together for 8 years. We didn't have children, but we didn't need anyone. We had each other, and that seemed enough, until fate decided otherwise. When he was gone, I felt like I'd lost half of myself, like a chunk had been ripped out of my chest, and silence and dust had fallen into the void. The house we'd bought together used to be filled with the smell of coffee and his laughter, the echo of his footsteps on the wooden floor, but now it seemed alien, vast, cold, with a dead air, where even the clocks ticked dully, as if afraid to disturb the peace. When I was in the hospital, my younger sister, Beatrice, came to see me. She's 35, 7 years younger than me, and when she entered the room, I immediately sensed her familiar restlessness, the same one I remembered from childhood. Her husband, Orlando, stood next to her, tall, serious, with a soft voice that always sounded like an apology. They looked tired and worried. "The doctor said you'll need help at home," Beatrice said, sitting down next to me and gently taking my hand. "You can't do everything alone right now." Orlando added, smiling almost apologetically, "We want to move in with you, Sophia. We want to help you until you get better." I nodded, at a loss for words. I was terrified of returning to that empty house alone, where every object reminded me of Michelle, and every little thing reminded me of what was no longer there. Their offer seemed like salvation. 2 weeks after my return from the hospital, they moved in. At first, everything went almost perfectly. Beatrice, like a child, fussed around me, helping with what I couldn't, bringing food, cooking, washing, cleaning, helping me get dressed when my arms gave out. She even joked that she had become my little sister on errands again. Orlando was busy in the yard, mending the fence, painting the deck, and sounds began to appear in the house again. Footsteps, voices, smells, life. I thought I was lucky to have them. But all of this involuntarily took me back to the past. Our parents died when I was very young, 23, and Beatrice was only 16. Then I became not just a sister to her, but almost a mother. I took her in with me, to a tiny rented apartment where the walls were thinner than cardboard, and the heat came not from radiators but from laughter. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes late into the night, to pay for her schooling, clothes, and food. When she graduated, I paid for college, all my savings, even the money I'd saved for a down payment. I remember counting my last dollars, $4,500, and thinking that the sacrifice for her didn't seem like a loss. Then I met Michelle. With him, I finally felt like I could live not just for someone else, but for myself, and Beatrice was already dating Orlando by then. At work, I think, I paid her rent while she was studying, and then, when they got married, I paid $15,000 for their wedding. I even took out a loan. Michelle grumbled, saying it was too much, but I just smiled. After all, she's my little sister. Now, all these years later, they were living with me, they cared for me, they helped me. I believed they did it out of love. Months passed, I slowly grew stronger, learning to stand more firmly again, to hold my cane with more confidence. Physical therapy was giving me my body back, but with it came the feeling of being independent again. a being able to make my own breakfast again, a being able to open a window again without having to wait for someone else to do it for me, and more often, I caught myself thinking that perhaps I no longer needed their help. 2 weeks ago, we were sitting at dinner, as usual, at the round table in the dining room, where Michelle once laughed, spilling wine on the tablecloth, insisting that the red stains gave the fabric character. Now, instead of his laughter, I heard only the clink of cutlery and a polite silence that stretched between us like a transparent but strong film. I took a long time to gather my courage, feeling uncertainty rising in my chest. But then, unexpectedly to myself, I said, "I've been thinking about it, guys, and now I feel much better. I can take care of myself again. You two have done so much for me, and I'm eternally grateful, but I think it's time for you to return to your own lives." The words came out calmly, even softly, though inside I was trembling, as if I stood on the edge of a precipice and had just taken a step. A pause hung in the room, thick and viscous, as if the air had suddenly grown heavier. Beatrice and Orlando exchanged glances, not immediately, but noticeably enough that I felt a chill in my chest. Orlando continued eating, pretending nothing had happened, as if my voice had simply sounded somewhere far away, not touching his reality, and Beatrice nodded slowly and said barely audibly, "Okay, Sophia, we'll talk about it." And that was it. No arguments, no promises, not even gratitude, just a calm that hid something alien. 2 weeks passed, but nothing had changed. They were still living with me, still occupying my rooms, still using my kitchen, and I increasingly found myself thinking that my own home had become cramped. I tried not to show my irritation, thinking that maybe they were just looking for a moment to leave, but then something happened that changed everything. It was yesterday. I was sitting in the living room with a book I'd reread for the third time, not because I liked it so much, but because the pages distracted me from my thoughts. My cane stood by the chair, my tea burning low next to me. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A message from Beatrice appeared on the screen. I didn't think anything of it. I simply opened it, expecting a short phrase like "We're leaving tomorrow" or "Should I buy some bread?" But it was a voice message. I pressed the button, held the phone to my ear, and immediately realized it wasn't for me. "Orlando, I can't do this anymore." Beatrice's voice trembled, laced with irritation and weariness, the very thing I'd once mistaken for concern. "I can't stand Sophia being in this house. She's such a burden. We've already spent so much money on her that we could have used for ourselves." My breath caught in my throat, my hands shaking so hard the phone almost slipped out of my hand. I listened, afraid to breathe, and the moment she said, "But I found a solution," something inside me snapped. She continued calmly, almost matter-of-factly, "There's a nursing home, it's only $1,200 a month. I've already spoken to the administrator. I told him Sophia has mental health issues, that it's dangerous for her to live alone." I felt an icy fear flare in my chest, as if the air around me had turned liquid. "He was very understanding," she added, as if that explained something. I couldn't move. Every word she said cut into me like a needle. Then she said, "I checked the house papers. Technically, it's registered to Sophia, but I found a way to transfer it to us. Remember Amanda, who works at the county registry office? She'll help. We'll do it so Sophia won't even know." I pressed my hand to my lips, trying not to scream. "I've already signed the preliminary papers." Then came her laugh, quiet, dry, alien. "Here's the plan. On Tuesday, we'll tell Sophia she has a medical exam, and instead, we'll take her to a nursing home and register her. By the time she realizes what's happening, it will be too late. We'll have paperwork, guardianship, everything legal." I could barely breathe, my heart pounding, as if it were trying to escape. Amanda said that with her medical reports mentioning post-accident confusion, it would be easy to prove she was incompetent, and when we get the house, we'll sell it. It's worth $720,000. We'll be able to pay off our debts, pay off the car loan, and still have some left over for that dream trip to Japan. Then she laughed louder, a real laugh, not nervous, not bitter, joyful, liberated. "The best part is, we won't have to pretend anymore. We won't have to help her bathe, cook, listen to her endless stories about Michelle. God, I hated that man. It's good he's dead." I don't remember the phone falling from my hands and hitting the floor. Tears streamed down my face, hot and scorching, and I only whispered to myself, "No, this can't be true." But the voice didn't lie. At the end, I heard the last words, Orlando's hoarse breathing and her words, "In a month, Sophia will be in a nursing home. we will own everything and finally live in peace, and then there was silence. I sat there, frozen, as if time had stood still and the world around me had ceased to exist, no sounds, no thoughts, only the pounding of my heart and the roar of blood in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't even take a deep breath, as if the air had become thick and heavy. My sister, my Beatrice, the same girl I once held her hand on the way to school, whose hair I braided, for whom I gave up myself, my dreams, my love, my rest, the sister I raised, fed, and protected, for whom I worked nights and prayed that everything would be different, better for her than mine, and now her voice, full of indifference and anger, echoed in my head like an impossible to get rid of echo. I remembered everything: how, after my parents' death, I took on part-time jobs, mopped floors, stood behind the cash register until late at night to buy her textbooks, her prom dress, to pay for college, when she dreamed of starting a new life. I remembered how Michelle grumbled but gave in when I took out a loan to arrange the wedding she'd dreamed of since childhood, and now I knew how it all turned out. A betrayal that couldn't be explained by fatigue, fear, or even greed. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, and felt an icy calm gradually rise in my chest, not rage, not pain, but a coldness, clear as the morning air before a storm. I knew I had to act. By dawn, I already knew what to do. With the first rays of light, I sat up in bed, put on comfortable jeans and a soft sweater, not because I was going somewhere far, but because I wanted to feel free, without strangers' hands, without strangers' gazes. I picked up my cane, the very one that had become a symbol of my stubbornness and strength, and, trying not to make any noise, began gathering everything important: my birth certificate, my marriage certificate with Michelle, my house deeds, my medical papers, everything that could prove I was still here, that I wasn't a helpless shadow, as they wanted, but a person, the master of my own life. I packed it all into a large leather bag and zipped it up, the sound of the lock ringing louder than I intended. Beatrice and Orlando were still asleep. I stopped at the door, glanced toward their room, and suddenly realized I felt neither anger nor regret, only fatigue. I called a taxi and, without leaving a note or saying goodbye, stepped out into the morning silence. The air was cool, the sky clear, and it seemed as if even the city didn't know that today would be the beginning of a new chapter in my life. First, I headed to the bank. It opened at 9, so I sat in the small coffee shop across the street. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my cup, and my thoughts swung between fear and determination. I thought over and over again of Beatrice's voice, soft, almost tender, as she told Orlando how to get rid of me, how he would get the house. I wanted to howl, but instead I quietly repeated to myself, "You're strong. You've survived storms like these." When the bank doors opened, I almost ran inside. The manager's name was Susan, a short, neat woman I'd worked with before. When Michelle and I were taking out our mortgage, I went straight to her, without waiting for the line to clear. "Susan, I need to check my accounts," I said. "I think someone's stealing money from me." She immediately became wary, invited me into her office, and, closing the door, turned on the computer. We went through everything together, line by line, transaction by transaction, until strange transfers appeared on the screen. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. The names, the amounts, the dates. Beatrice, she transferred money from account to account, carefully, monthly, in small increments, but eventually the sum accumulated to a huge amount, about $10,000. "How is this possible?" I asked, feeling a chill run through my stomach. I never gave her permission. Susan frowned, looked more closely, then turned the screen toward me. "It says here that a power of attorney was issued, see? The signature is right here." I looked, and my breath caught in my throat. The signature did indeed look like mine, but I knew I hadn't done it. "That's not my signature," I said quietly but confidently. "She forged it. I've never signed anything like that." Susan printed out the documents, put them in a folder, and handed them to me. "You need to report them to the police immediately," she said. "This is fraud." "I'll do it," I replied, feeling my stomach tighten, "but first, I need to find out something." I left the bank and got into a taxi, heading to the county registrar's office. I knew I had to find Amanda Richardson, Beatrice's friend, the one who had promised to help them with the deeds to my house. When I entered the building, which smelled of paper and cheap coffee, I went up to the reception desk and asked for Amanda. The receptionist made a phone call, and a few minutes later, A woman in her 30s with bright lipstick and faded hair emerged from behind the door. She looked at me over her glasses and asked with cool, professional politeness, "How can I help you?" "My name is Sophia," I said, feeling my stomach tighten. "I'm Sister Beatrice." Her face changed instantly, as if someone had abruptly removed a mask. I saw a flicker of alarm in her eyes, her lips twitch, and her fingers clasped together. She tried to smile, but it was strained, and I immediately knew she knew why I'd come. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I was trembling inside. Amanda nodded, and we headed to a small conference room at the end of the hallway, complete with a long table, a few plastic chairs, and the smell of paper and air conditioning. I closed the door behind us, and at that moment I felt my fingers tremble. Before sitting down, I discreetly slipped my hand into my coat pocket and turned on the recorder on my phone. I'd set it in the taxi on the way here. "Beatrice told me about your plan," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. Amanda's face went white, as if all the color had suddenly drained out of her. She blinked, then said quickly, "I don't understand what you're talking about." I nodded slowly. "Yes, of course," I said with a tired smile. "She told me everything, about how you're going to help her forge documents to have me declared incompetent, and about how you're going to help her steal my house." Amanda shook her head, too sharply, as if she wanted to dismiss her own words. "No, I never said I'd do it," she said, but her voice wavered. "Beatrice did ask me a few questions about the legal side of things, but I never agreed to anything illegal." "So you did talk to her about it?" I asked. She looked away, her lips pressed together. "Well, yes," she finally admitted, "but only hypothetically." I leaned forward, my palms on the table, feeling the anger building within me, but I held it in check, not letting it spill out. "What exactly did she tell you?" I asked quietly. Amanda sighed heavily, a bead of sweat rolling down her forehead. "She said you were ill, that your condition was worsening, and she was worried about you. She asked how to legally establish guardianship if someone can no longer make decisions for themselves." "And what did you tell her?" I asked, not looking away. She looked down at the tabletop, as if the words themselves were too heavy. "I said that if you have a medical certificate of mental incompetence, you can petition the court to establish guardianship. After that, the guardian has the right to manage the ward's affairs, including property." "Did you offer to help her with the paperwork?" I asked the question deliberately slowly, watching every shadow on her face. A long, agonizing pause followed. I saw her fingers clench, her gaze darting to the door, as if searching for a way out. Finally, Amanda spoke, quieter, almost a whisper. She asked if I could help her get everything done quickly, without any red tape. "She said you were in danger, that you needed immediate help, and I said I'd see what I could do." "So you were going to help her forge documents and steal my house," I said evenly, coldly, as if stating a fact. Amanda's head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "No," she said too sharply, "I thought I was helping someone in need." But her voice sounded uncertain, as if she could hear how poorly her excuse sounded. It became clear to me. I'd heard everything I needed to hear. I pulled out my phone and turned off the recorder. "Thank you for your honesty," I said calmly, standing up. She looked at me, unsure of what to say. I simply nodded and walked out, leaving her sitting among the papers that could now become evidence. The air outside felt different, cool, sharp, cleansing. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my cane, feeling everything slowly coming into order inside. Now I had everything: evidence, notes, documents. The next step was to find a lawyer. That same morning, I called my old friend Laura, whom I hadn't seen for several years but who had once helped me find a lawyer when Michelle and I were buying a house. She listened to me in silence, then said, "I know who you need. His name is Robert Chen. He's an excellent lawyer, firm and honest. Contact him." Robert's office was in the city center, on the 5th floor of an old brick building with narrow windows and the smell of coffee. He met me at the door, a man of about 40, wearing a gray suit. With an intent gaze, we walked into his office, and I told him everything, from beginning to end, hiding nothing. I played a voicemail recording from Beatrice and showed him the bank statements, which showed the transfers and the forged power of attorney. Then I took out my phone and played the recording of the conversation with Amanda. Robert listened attentively, without interrupting, only nodding occasionally and making brief notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, whistled softly, and said, "This is serious, Sophia, very serious." He looked at me with a long, unwavering gaze, devoid of pity, only professional focus. "Your sister and her husband were planning several crimes at once," he said, "fraud, forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy, and this woman, Amanda, if all is confirmed, is their accomplice. What can we do?" I asked, feeling a choking sensation in my chest, as if all the strength I'd built up over these agonizing days had suddenly deserted me. Robert looked at me calmly, but his eyes were hard as steel, and in them I saw the determination I lacked myself. "We'll go to the police," he said without a shadow of a doubt. "Right now, we have all the evidence, and they'll have to launch an investigation." I took a deep breath, feeling those words, simple and logical, resonate with a sharp fear inside me. "Will my sister go to prison?" I asked, barely audible. Robert looked at me intently, as if assessing whether I was ready to hear the answer. "Possibly," he finally said. "It depends on a lot of factors. The prosecutor might offer a deal if she pleads guilty, but yes, Sophia, there's a good chance she'll be charged with multiple offenses." I fell silent, looking at his office window, where the streams of cars and bustling people streamed past the glass. For them, this day was ordinary, unremarkable, but for me, it meant the end of a lifetime. I thought of Beatrice, the girl I once held in my arms when my mother fell ill and died too early, the one for whom I took night shifts to buy her a prom dress, the one for whom I gave up my own plans, the sister for whom I always stood by, and now the same sister was cold-bloodedly planning to destroy me, to erase me as if I were just an inconvenience. Her words from that damned voicemail came flooding back to me, how she'd spoken of Michel, how she was glad he was dead, how she couldn't bear my presence any longer, how she wanted to get rid of me. It felt like something had snapped inside me. "Let's go to the police," I finally said, my voice firm, almost unexpected even by myself. I didn't go home that night. I'd rented a room in a small hotel near the airport, a simple room, clean, quiet, without any extra amenities, but that's exactly what I wanted. I needed a place to think, where no one would ask questions. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, which kept vibrating. Beatrice was calling, then Orlando. They were leaving messages, texting, begging me to answer. "Where are you? Are you okay? We're worried about you. Please call me back." I read those words and felt a wave of anger, mixed with disgust, rise. I didn't give them any answers. I simply turned off the phone, lay down on my bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time, where the streetlight cast slowly moving shadows. Tomorrow everything will change, I thought. Tomorrow Beatrice will find out that I know everything, and then her carefully constructed world will collapse like a house of cards, just as she had planned to destroy mine. In the morning, I met Robert at the police station, as arranged. He arrived on time, wearing a gray suit and carrying his usual folder. Inside was all the evidence, bank statements, a forged power of attorney, a recording of Amanda's confession, and, of course, the voicemail in which Beatrice completely gave herself away. We went into an office where two detectives were waiting. A man in his 50s with a short gray haircut and a younger woman with lively, attentive eyes. Her name was Detective Martinez. She introduced herself, invited me to sit down, and immediately turned on the recorder. I told them everything, from the evening I heard the voicemail to my visit to the bank, to Amanda, and to my meeting with Robert. They listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When exactly I heard the message, how long my sister had been staying with me, who had access to the documents, were there any witnesses, I answered honestly, trying not to miss a single detail, although my voice trembled at times. The detectives took notes, exchanged glances, and I could see from their faces that they had no doubts. When I finished, Detective Martinez looked up from her notes and said, "We have enough information to move forward. We'll file a warrant and begin the interview." I felt my mouth go dry. "I want to be there," I said. "When you tell them, I want to see their faces." Martinez looked at Robert, as if asking for his silent approval. He nodded. "We can make it happen," she said, her voice almost gentle, as if she understood how important it was to me. An hour later, we were driving to my house, two police cars in front and behind, and Robert and I in the middle. The drive seemed endless, and the whole time I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. My heart was pounding in my throat. I thought about what it would be like to see Beatrice, to hear her voice, to see her face change when she realized I knew everything. that her lie had been exposed. It was around 11 in the morning when we pulled up to the house. Beatrice's car was parked in the driveway, next to Orlando's. They were home. I stepped out, feeling the ground beneath my feet sway slightly. Robert was nearby, and the detectives were following us. I walked to the door, took out the key, and slowly turned it in the lock. Inside, the smell of coffee and toast filled the air. Beatrice was standing in the kitchen, in her robe, holding a cup. When she heard the door open, she turned around, and her face lit up with relief. "Sophia! My God, where have you been?" she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "We were so worried. We called, we texted, we thought something terrible had happened." But she didn't have time to finish. Her eyes darted to the police officers who had entered behind us. Beatrice's face changed instantly, the smile vanished, as if it had been wiped off her face in one movement. Orlando emerged from the living room, adjusting the sleeves of his shirt, a look of confusion and irritation frozen on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from me to Beatrice, not understanding why there were strangers in uniform in the house. I didn't answer. I simply slowly, without taking my eyes off my sister, pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the message I needed, and put it on speakerphone. For a moment, a tense silence filled the house, like before a thunderstorm, and then Beatrice's voice rang through the air, my own vocal nightmare, recorded to someday serve as evidence. "Orlando, I can't do this anymore. I can't see Sophia in this house. She's such a burden," she said in her familiar tone, and the words sent a chill down my spine. I saw Beatrice's face turn pale, her eyes darting from the phone to me, then to Robert, then to the detective standing at the door. Orlando froze, his mouth slightly open, and he looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time, without the mask, without the gentle voice, without the false concern, but the voice continued, merciless, like a knife cutting through the air. The plan to place me in a nursing home, the idea of forging documents, the talk of selling the house, even her cold words about how she hated Michel and how pleased she was that he was dead, each phrase seemed to strike me, but I held on, not looking away. When the recording ended, a deathly silence fell over the room, so thick it felt like you could touch it. I looked at my sister, and there was no anger or pain left inside me, only a strange weariness and cold. "It's not what you think." "I didn't mean," Beatrice began, but her voice trembled, and her words faltered. "Don't," I interrupted calmly, almost whispering, but there was no doubt or pity in my voice. "Don't lie to me anymore." Robert stepped forward, opened a leather folder, and pulled out several papers. "We also have evidence," he said evenly, "that you forged documents to gain access to your sister's bank account. According to the statements, over the past few months, you transferred approximately $10,000 without her consent." He pulled out another sheet, unfolded it, and continued, "Furthermore, we have a confession from Amanda Richardson, an employee of the county registry office." She confirmed that you discussed with her the possibility of establishing a legal guardianship over Sophia and transferring ownership of her house. Robert carefully placed the papers on the table, then pulled out the last document, and finally, "We have a receipt confirming that you paid for a place in a nursing home in your sister's name without notifying her." Beatrice swayed, covered her face with her hands, and began to cry, loudly, ugly, with sobs that no longer sounded like remorse, but like despair. "Sophia, please, you don't understand," she said through her tears. "We tried to help you, really, you were in terrible shape, you couldn't cope, we wanted you to get better." "I only need one thing," I said, feeling my pity recede, "for you to stop lying." Detective Martinez stepped forward, pulled a warrant from her inside pocket, and said firmly, "Beatrice Morrison, Orlando Morrison, you are both under arrest on charges of fraud, forgery, theft, and conspiracy to commit a felony. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in court." "No. No, please," Beatrice cried out, gasping for air. "Sophia, I'm your sister. I just made a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, don't do this." Her voice broke. She reached for me, but the detectives were already handcuffing her. Orlando stood nearby, pale, his eyes empty, as if his soul had been sucked out of him. He said nothing, merely silently holding out his hands as the second detective approached. The metal locks clicked, and at that moment, it felt like the house finally became easier to breathe. The process took several months. During that time, I barely left the house, not out of fear, but because something inside me felt dead, and I simply didn't know how to go on. Robert took on the entire legal burden: phone calls, paperwork, meetings with the prosecutor. People from the prosecutor's office called me, asking for clarification, discussing my testimony. Sometimes I'd sit in his office and watch him write, with one thought running through my head: how quickly everything falls apart when those you love betray you. Calls came from prison. I knew the numbers by heart. Sometimes it was Beatrice, sometimes Orlando. I didn't answer. Then the letters started arriving, neatly written, long, with words like "I'm sorry, I wasn't myself, I didn't know what I was doing." I tore the envelopes open and threw them in the trash. I couldn't bear to read the lies anymore. And then, the day before the trial, Robert called. His voice was tired but calm. "Sophia, they want to make a deal," he said. "Beatrice and Orlando agree to plead guilty to all charges. In exchange, the prosecutor will recommend probation, 6 months probation for each of them, and the same for Amanda." I was silent for a long time, feeling a deep ache in my stomach, as if my heart didn't know whether to rejoice or cry. 6 months, for everything: for betrayal, for lies, for trying to take my home from me, for hatred, for what they did to me. 6 months probation. What does that mean? I asked, although I already knew the answer wouldn't be easy. Robert looked at me with a tired but calm gaze, as if weighing whether to speak frankly. "This means," he said, carefully folding the papers, "that they'll be on probation for 6 months. If they don't break the law during that time, they won't go to jail, but they'll still have a criminal record, and they'll be required to return all the stolen money, plus $20,000 in compensation to you." He said this evenly, without emotion, like a man who's seen too many dramas end without winners. I was silent for a long time, then I asked, "Will they lose their jobs?" Robert nodded. "Possibly. Most employers don't want to keep people with criminal records, especially for fraud. Reputations are fragile." He looked down for a moment, then added, "But that's none of your concern, Sophia." I took a deep breath and said, "Okay, tell them I accept the deal." The deal was made a week later. Beatrice, Orlando, and Amanda stood before the judge, heads bowed, and pleaded guilty. Their voices were quiet, without their former confidence, as if everything that had once given meaning to their lives had been ripped out of them. The judge sentenced each of them to 6 months probation and ordered me to repay $10,000 in stolen money, as well as $20,000 in restitution. A total of $30,000. I sat in the courtroom and looked at my sister, feeling nothing but a strange emptiness. I wasn't happy or angry. I simply watched as what had once been called a family completely turned to ashes. As Robert predicted, they both lost their jobs almost immediately. Amanda, too, through mutual friends. I learned that everyone in our town now knew their story. People whispered about them in the supermarket, avoided them on the street, and stopped greeting them. Those who had previously invited them to dinners and parties now turned away, as if afraid of being infected with their shame. They began to be called the ungrateful sister and brother-in-law who had tried to rob a disabled woman, and, as harsh as it may sound, I didn't feel sorry for them. Perhaps for the first time in many years, I felt justice, not the cold, judicial kind, but the human kind, the kind that restores a disturbed balance. Meanwhile, I began to change my life. The house where Michelle and I had lived for so many years ceased to feel like home to me. Every corner reminded me of pain, of betrayal, of those days when I lay in bed believing my family was nearby, only to find my enemies were nearby. I put the house up for sale, and to my surprise, it quickly found a new owner. It fetched a good price, and I didn't even feel any regret when I signed the papers at the notary's office. With the proceeds, I bought an apartment in a new residential complex built specifically for people with disabilities. The building was modern, bright, and comfortable, with wide doorways, smooth ramps, and quiet elevators. Downstairs was a clinic where I could continue my physical therapy, and a little further down was a small gym equipped for people like me. There was even a pool where I could swim without putting any strain on my legs, and every time I dipped into the water, I felt like I was regaining the lightness the accident had robbed me of. Everything in this place was designed for me to live, not just survive. A few weeks after moving in, I went to the notary and changed my will. I decided that all my property, money, apartment, securities, would go to a charity after my death that helps people with disabilities, people who, like me, have found themselves in difficult situations. Beatrice wouldn't get $1, not because I'm vindictive, but because she's no longer a part of my life. As I signed the documents, I felt relief for the first time in a long time, a real, pure relief. In that moment, I realized that all the ties that bound me to the past were finally broken. Life in the new apartment quickly settled into its usual routine. I developed my own routine. Every morning I woke up, made coffee, listened to the sunlight streaming into the room through the sheer curtains, and stretched. Then I'd go down to the gym, where I'd work out for exactly an hour, no more, no less. The clinic's physiotherapist had created a special program for me, and I followed it strictly. After my exercises, I'd return home, sit at a small easel by the window, and paint. Before the accident, I'd never held a brush, but now this activity became a way for me to keep my thoughts under control. At first, the drawings were clumsy, the colors clashed, the lines shaky, but over time, they got better. I painted landscapes, the fields where Michelle and I used to walk, Italian streets, our garden, the sea. Each brushstroke was like a breath. After lunch, I usually went to the community center where I volunteered. I helped those recovering from injuries, talked about how to cope with pain, how to regain the belief that it was possible to live a full life. Sometimes I just listened to them, the young and the not so young, the confused, the tired. It was important to me that my experience, my story, even my pain would serve someone for the good. All these months, I heard nothing from Beatrice and Orlando, no calls, no letters. Since the trial, they had vanished from my life, as if they had never existed. I didn't know where they lived or what they were doing, and frankly, I didn't want to know. For me, they were dead, not physically, but in my memory, and perhaps that was my true liberation. And then one day, about 6 months after the trial ended, when life had finally found a measured, quiet rhythm, and the days had become similar in their comfortable predictability, I was sitting in a small cafe just around the corner from my new home. It was an ordinary Tuesday, just like dozens of others before it, and in this ordinary peace I found a special solace. I sipped jasmine tea, feeling the warmth from the cup warm my palms, and read an old book, its pages already smelling of time and faintly reeking of dust. The cafe was sparsely populated. A couple of students stood at the counter, discussing something in hushed tones, and at a distant table, an elderly lady was writing something in a notebook. Peace and silence permeated the air. I looked up from my book and felt my heart stop for a second. Beatrice stood by the door, my sister. She didn't notice me right away, but when our eyes met, time seemed to spin around. And I found myself back in those days, in that house where the scent of coffee still lingered in the morning, where her laughter sounded like something familiar, and where everything had fallen apart. Beatrice looked different, thinner, her hair shorter and duller, with deep shadows under her eyes and her shoulders slumped, like someone long weary of life. For a while, we simply looked at each other, not saying a word. Then she slowly approached my table. "Sophia," she said quietly, her voice hesitant, "may I sit?" I didn't answer, I didn't nod, I didn't refuse. She took my silence as permission and sank into the chair opposite me. We sat in silence, hearing only the faint hum of the coffee machine and the clink of spoons on porcelain. I noticed her hands trembling as she tucked her hair behind her ear. "I saw you through the window," she finally said, as if justifying her appearance. "I wasn't following you, really, I was just passing by, saw you here, and thought maybe this is a sign that I should talk to you." I remained silent, studying her face. It was no longer filled with the confidence, the cold gleam I remembered. "I wanted to apologize," she continued. "I know it's not enough, I know words won't change anything, but I want you to know, I'm sorry, very sorry." "Okay," I said calmly, even to myself. My voice sounded lifeless. "I lost everything," she said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "Orlando and I lost our jobs, our apartment, our friends. People turn their backs on us like we're contagious. We had to move, far away from here, to practically nowhere. Now I work at a gas station, Orlando in a warehouse. We barely make ends meet." I sipped my tea slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on hers, waiting for her to continue. "I know I deserved all this," she said, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cheap jacket. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I was greedy, selfish, blind. I said terrible things about you and Michelle. I tried to rob you. After everything you've done for me." She took a shuddering breath, as if surprised she could even speak those words out loud. "I think about it every day," she continued, "how you took care of me after Mom and Dad died, how you worked 2 jobs to pay for my schooling, how you helped me get married, how you supported me when I was down, and I repaid you with betrayal. I wanted to put you in a nursing home and take your house." She began to cry again, but I still didn't say a word. Inside me, there was no anger, no pity, only a quiet, weary indifference, like after a long illness. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, almost whispering. "I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry, every word, every action. If I could go back, I would change everything." I carefully closed the book and looked her straight in the eyes. "Do you remember what you said in that voicemail?" I asked, "about Michelle." She winced, as if struck. "You said you always hated him, that you were glad he was dead." I didn't mean it that way," Beatrice whispered. "I was angry, upset. I said terrible things I didn't mean." "No," I said firmly, "that's exactly what you meant. Maybe not the part where you were glad he was dead, but you hated him, always. Because you were jealous, because you thought he took me away from you." Beatrice lowered her head, her shoulders shook, but she was no longer crying. It seemed to me that for the first time she heard what she'd always known but been afraid to admit. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with everything that could never be regained. "And you know what's most terrible, Beatrice?" I said, feeling that rare calm welling up within me, the one that usually conceals not anger but utter exhaustion. "It's not even about the money. It's not that you tried to deceive me, not that you were ready to get rid of me like excess baggage. All of this could have been understood, forgiven, explained away as despair, stupidity, the influence of others. But no, the fact is, you decided to do all this after I dedicated my entire life to you, gave you my best years, my strength, my health. After I considered you not just a sister, but a daughter, a part of me. I looked after you when you were sick, protected you when you were hurt, paid for your education, your wedding, your whims, and all of this because I believed that love was something that could never be betrayed, and you couldn't even pretend to care for me for a little longer, even for a year, even for a month, when I was at my worst." "I know," Beatrice sobbed, lowering her head, her shoulders shaking as if she finally realized the full weight of her actions. "I know, Sophia, and I'm so sorry there are no words to make it right." I finished my tea, tasting the astringency of the tea leaves on my tongue, and slowly rose. My legs still didn't obey me as well as they used to, so I picked up my cane, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. For a while, I simply looked at Beatrice, at her haggard face, at her hands clutching the edge of the table, as if afraid she might fall. "I forgive you," I said quietly. Her eyes looked up at me, a flicker of hope flickering in them, fragile as a candle flame in the wind. "But I won't forget," I continued slowly, enunciating each word carefully. "I won't forget what you tried to do to me, and I don't want to see you again." "Sophia, please," she whispered, taking a step forward. "I'm serious, Beatrice," I interrupted. "I really do forgive you, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life clinging to pain and resentment. I'm tired of this. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to be a part of my life again. Just know this, I'm not angry anymore, but you blocked your own way back." I turned and headed for the exit. Behind me, I heard her cry softly, almost silently, muffled, and the sound haunted me until the door closed. I haven't looked back, not once. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I haven't seen Beatrice or heard anything about her. I don't know where she lives, whether she and Orlando are together, or how their lives are going, and, to be honest, I don't care. I once thought that without family, a person loses a part of themselves, but now I understand. Sometimes losing those who hurt you is the only way to save yourself. I'm doing well now, better than I have in years. I walk almost every day without a cane. I only pick it up when I'm especially tired or after standing for a long time. Physical therapy is working wonders. My body is getting stronger, my movements are more confident, and with them, it's as if my zest for life has returned. I feel like I can move forward again. At the community center where I volunteer, I've made new friends, people who, like me, know what it means to recover from a fall, to rediscover faith in yourself and in life. We support each other, rejoice in small victories, laugh when someone takes their first step without support or raises a hand that has been motionless for a long time. We are learning to be strong together. I continue to paint. With each passing month, the paintings become brighter, more confident. Recently, for the first time, I decided to exhibit a few of them at a local art fair, and, to my surprise, 3 were bought. Although it was inexpensive, it was my work, my soul on canvas, and I felt a sense of pride, quiet, deep, like a light within. I still miss Michel, I think I always will. Sometimes, in the mornings, when the sunlight falls on the walls, I feel as if he is near, that his smile still illuminates my life. But now, when I remember him, it doesn't hurt. I think of the good times, our walks, the nights by the fireplace, his jokes that made me laugh until I cried. The grief has softened, it no longer cuts at my soul, but merely reminds me of the love that was true. I no longer have a family, at least not in the traditional sense, but I've created a new one. The people I've met here, my friends from the center, my physical therapist, my neighbors, they've become what I used to call family. These are people who are there not because they have to, but because they want to. They take an interest in my life, listen when I speak, and rejoice with me. And looking at them, for the first time in a long time, I feel not alone, that everything I've been through has had meaning, if only for this peace, this quiet, mature happiness that comes not from victories, but from forgiveness.